Carlos Alcaraz just made an announcement that tennis fans were dreading, and it's about to change everything about how we see his US Open title defense. For weeks, the plan seemed simple. Alcaraz, out since April with a wrist injury, was going to use Cincinnati as his comeback tournament. One Masters 1000 event. 2 weeks of real match play. Just enough time to shake off the rust before defending his US Open crown in New York. It was supposed to be the moment we finally got to see him again. Not in a training video, not in a carefully staged practice clip, but in a real match, under real pressure, against a real opponent trying to beat him. That plan is dead. Carlos Alcaraz has withdrawn from the Cincinnati Open. No warm-up, no tune-up matches, no live reps against real opponents before the biggest tournament of his year. Just silence, again, from the man who's supposed to be defending his crown in a matter of weeks. And here's the part that should really worry his fans. This wasn't some other player's random injury update, buried in a list of names most casual fans wouldn't even recognize. This was the reigning US Open champion, the man defending his title in less than a month. And even now, in August, deep into the season, his body still isn't ready to compete at the level Cincinnati would have demanded. Let that sink in for a second. Madrid, gone. Rome, gone. The French Open, the tournament where he'd once produced a match many still call the greatest of the decade, gone. Wimbledon, the trophy he'd defended twice, the one place that felt like it truly belonged to him, gone. And now Cincinnati, gone too. That's 5 tournaments. 5. In a season where he's supposed to be at the absolute peak of his powers, in the prime years of his career, with nothing standing between him and total domination of men's tennis, except, apparently, his own body. Think about what that means practically. 5 tournaments is not a bad week. It's not a minor blip you shrug off and move past. It's nearly half a calendar year of competitive tennis simply erased. For most players, that would already be described as a lost season. For a 23-year-old who was supposed to be entering his prime, it's something closer to a crisis, even if nobody around him wants to use that word out loud. So the question everyone's asking right now is simple, and it's not a comfortable one. If he wasn't ready for Cincinnati, a tournament specifically chosen because it was supposed to be low risk, controlled, manageable, what exactly makes anyone think he's going to be ready for New York? A place with no mercy, no easing in, no gentle reintroduction to tour-level tennis, just the brightest lights in the sport, a 5-set format that tests bodies at their absolute limit, and a crowd of over 20,000 people expecting the champion they remember, not the version of him that's about to show up. Let's talk about what not ready actually means here, because Alcaraz's team isn't calling this a setback. They're calling it caution. They're framing it, carefully, as the responsible decision of a team protecting a young superstar's long-term health. And to be fair, there's real logic in that framing. Nobody wants to see a 23-year-old rush back into competition and re-aggravate an injury that could threaten years of his career. But caution this late in the calendar has a cost, and that cost is quietly becoming impossible to ignore. Cincinnati wasn't just any tournament on the schedule. It was supposed to be the one live test before a Grand Slam, the last chance to find out, in a competitive setting, whether 4 months of rehabilitation had actually translated into tour-ready tennis. Best of 5 sets doesn't exist at Masters 1000 events, but everything else about the environment, the crowd, the media scrutiny, the physical intensity of top-level opponents, was meant to simulate exactly what's waiting for him in New York. And the only way to prepare for that kind of pressure is matches, real ones. Not practice sets behind closed doors, not hitting sessions with a coach feeding balls at controlled pace, not simulated points designed to protect the very wrist he's trying to test. Instead, Alcaraz now walks into the US Open having played 0 official matches since April. 0. Not limited match play. Not reduced. 0. That's over 100 days of competitive silence, about to stretch well past 120 by the time he actually steps onto Arthur Ashe Stadium for his first-round match. For context, that's longer than most players' entire offseason combined with their entire clay swing. Now compare that to the men waiting for him there. Jannik Sinner, fresh off defending Wimbledon back-to-back, a player who has barely had a bad week all season, sitting comfortably atop the rankings with no signs of slowing down. Alexander Zverev, a brand new Grand Slam champion after finally breaking through in Paris, backing that up with a Wimbledon final appearance and a career-high ranking. These are not rusty players hoping to rediscover their range in New York. These are players who have spent the entire summer competing at the highest possible intensity, week after week, building match sharpness that simply cannot be replicated any other way. And Alcaraz? He's about to walk into the most physically and mentally demanding tournament of the tennis calendar, with less match play in 2026 than a player returning from a full off-season injury layoff, less than a player who tore something in January and is only now getting back onto court. That's the level of rust we're talking about, and it's happening at the exact moment the stakes are highest. Even his own camp seems torn on how to talk about it publicly. The official line is patience. Protect the wrist, protect the long-term career. Don't risk years of a young superstar's prime for one tournament. And on paper, that's a defensible philosophy. But patience and readiness are not the same thing, and conflating the two is where this story gets uncomfortable. You can absolutely protect a wrist and still lose in straight sets to a player who has 15 competitive matches in his legs from the summer, while you have none. Protecting the body doesn't automatically protect the result. So here's the uncomfortable truth nobody in Alcaraz's camp wants to say out loud, at least not on the record. This wasn't a decision made from a position of strength. It wasn't, we're confident, so we're choosing caution. It was a decision made because there genuinely was no other viable choice left on the table. The wrist simply wasn't ready, and no amount of wishful scheduling was going to change that reality. Now here's where it gets serious for Alcaraz, because this isn't just about missing one more tournament on a list that's already uncomfortably long. It's about the math of what's actually left before the US Open begins, and that math is brutal. The US Open main draw starts August 30th. Cincinnati was his last realistic chance for live match reps before that date, the only Masters 1000 event remaining on the calendar between now and New York. There's no other tour-level tournament left to fall back on, no safety net, no backup plan quietly waiting in reserve, just a straight, unforgiving jump from 4 months of competitive silence directly into the pressure of a Grand Slam, on a hard court, against a field that has never been sharper. Some reports suggest his team might scramble to find him a low-key wildcard somewhere on the calendar, maybe Winston-Salem, a smaller ATP 250 event that sometimes serves as a last-minute tune-up for players in exactly this situation. But even that would be exactly what it sounds like. A scramble, a handful of matches thrown together at the 11th hour, against a field of lower-ranked opponents who don't remotely resemble the level of competition waiting for him in New York. It's better than absolutely nothing. But it is nowhere close to genuine tournament preparation, and everyone close to the situation knows it. And here's the thing that makes this genuinely alarming for Alcaraz fans, not just mildly concerning. History is not kind to players who return to Grand Slams cold. Even the greatest champions the sport has ever produced, players with far more tournament experience and far more physical durability than a 23-year-old with a chronic wrist issue, have typically needed multiple tournaments, plural, spread across weeks, to fully rediscover their timing after a long layoff. Not days, not one hastily arranged 250-level event squeezed in at the last minute. Weeks of live, competitive tennis, against opponents who are actually trying to beat them. Alcaraz doesn't have weeks anymore. He has days. A handful of days between whatever last-minute preparation his team can arrange and the moment he has to walk out in front of a packed Arthur Ashe Stadium and perform at a Grand Slam level, immediately, with no room for a slow start. So when his team frames this Cincinnati withdrawal publicly as simply protecting his career, fans have every right to push back on that framing and ask the harder question underneath it. Protecting it for what, exactly? A first-round or second-round exit in New York because his timing simply isn't there yet? Because 4 months away from competition doesn't just disappear the moment you decide you're ready? Or worse, re-aggravating the exact same wrist injury under the physical strain of best-of-5 tennis, with no tournament left beforehand to safely test it under real match conditions. This is no longer simply a story about caution, about a smart, protective decision made by a careful team. This is a story about a champion who is quietly, visibly running out of road, out of tournaments, out of preparation time, out of margin for error, right before the one event where he has the absolute most to lose. So what actually happens now? Let's lay out the real scenarios in front of Alcaraz, because fans deserve to understand exactly what they're walking into when the US Open begins, rather than just hoping for the best and being blindsided if it goes wrong. Scenario 1. Alcaraz's team manages to secure a late wildcard into a smaller tournament, something like Winston-Salem, and he squeezes in 2 or 3 matches against lower-tier opponents in the days immediately before the US Open begins. It's better than nothing. Some rhythm is better than none, but it's nowhere close to the level of preparation Sinner or Zverev are walking into New York with. A couple of matches against unranked or lower-ranked players simply cannot replicate the intensity, the shot-making, or the physical demands of a best-of-5 Grand Slam match against elite opposition. Scenario 2. There's no wild card at all, no last-minute arrangement, and Alcaraz walks directly from an empty practice court into Arthur Ashe Stadium for round 1 of a Grand Slam completely cold. His first competitive point of the year, coming in the biggest tournament of the year, against a player who's been competing at full intensity for months, with tens of thousands of fans watching and expecting the champion he was, not the version of him currently untested and unproven. Either way, the numbers surrounding him are simply brutal when you line them up side by side. Sinner, back-to-back Wimbledon titles, world number 1, barely tested all season, a player operating with total confidence and rhythm. Zverev, a first career Grand Slam title finally secured in Paris, a Wimbledon final run on top of that, a career high ranking, playing with the kind of self-belief that only comes from finally breaking through after years of near misses. And then Alcaraz, the reigning defending champion, walking in with less competitive tennis under his belt this entire year than almost anyone left in the draw, including players ranked well outside the top 10. This is the part that should genuinely worry his fans more than any single injury update. It's not just that Alcaraz is undercooked heading into New York. It's that the field around him has never, at any point in recent memory, been sharper or more confident. Every withdrawal, every missed tournament across this entire season wasn't simply Alcaraz standing still while he waited to heal. It was the rest of the tour actively pulling further and further ahead of him, accumulating ranking points, match experience, confidence, and belief, while he watched, week after week, from a training facility or a rehab room, unable to do anything but wait. There's a very real, very uncomfortable chance we're about to watch the defending US Open champion get bounced early from his own tournament. Not because he's suddenly lost his talent, not necessarily because his wrist gives out under pressure, but simply because match sharpness is not something that can be manufactured overnight, no matter how much raw ability a player has. You either have that sharpness built up through weeks of live competition, or you don't. There's no shortcut, no amount of talent alone that fully substitutes for it. Right now, by every measurable standard available, Carlos Alcaraz does not have it. And the calendar has run out of time to fix that before New York. So where does this actually leave Carlos Alcaraz, with less than a month now standing between him and the tournament he's supposed to be defending? Less than a month from now, he's supposed to walk out onto Arthur Ashe Stadium as the defending US Open champion, the man who lifted that trophy just last year, the player many considered the closest thing men's tennis had to a guaranteed superstar for the next decade. Instead, he'll be walking out as something else entirely, a question mark, a player nobody, not the commentators, not the bookmakers, not even his own coaching staff, can confidently predict, simply because there isn't enough recent evidence to base a prediction on. 4 months of silence doesn't give you data, it gives you uncertainty. This was supposed to be the summer Carlos Alcaraz solidified himself, once and for all, as the undisputed man to beat in men's tennis. The player who had already beaten Sinner in the best match either of them may ever play, the 2-time Wimbledon champion, the defending US Open champion, entering his athletic prime with seemingly nothing standing in his way. Instead, it became the summer where Jannik Sinner and Alexander Zverev quietly, methodically took over the sport, while Alcaraz watched from the sidelines, tournament after tournament, withdrawal after withdrawal, each one chipping away a little more at the aura that once surrounded him. And now, with Cincinnati gone too, the very last realistic chance to close that gap before New York, there's simply no more time left to fix it, no more tune-ups on the schedule, no more safety net waiting in reserve. Just Carlos Alcaraz, a heavily strapped and still recovering wrist, and a Grand Slam draw absolutely full of players who are sharper, hungrier, and infinitely more battle-tested than he currently is. Maybe he shocks everyone. Maybe 4 months of frustration, of watching his rivals lift trophies he believes should have been his, turns into the kind of explosive, emotionally charged run that becomes the defining story of the entire tournament. It has happened before in this sport. Champions returning from serious adversity, written off by nearly everyone, tearing through a draw on pure adrenaline and unfinished business, silencing every doubt in the span of 2 dramatic weeks. But if it doesn't happen that way, if the rust genuinely shows the moment real pressure arrives, if the wrist doesn't hold up under the unique torque of a full tournament, if the sharper, more battle-tested players simply have too much of an edge for talent alone to overcome, this could end up being remembered as the exact moment Carlos Alcaraz's title defense quietly ended, not with a dramatic collapse on center court, but weeks earlier, in a withdrawal announcement from a tournament in Cincinnati that most casual fans barely even noticed at the time. Either way, one thing right now is absolutely certain. Whatever happens once the draw is released and the matches actually begin, Carlos Alcaraz is walking into New York with everything imaginable to lose. And, right now, almost nothing recent to prove he's actually capable of stopping it from happening. We'll be watching every match. Will you?